Tonight we have a great event for you guys this evening. It's a real estate event. We have brought some real estate professionals in under 3 different topics. And the goal is just to add value, add benefit to you guys as you start to make more money in this field. You got a little bit more on your paycheck. You're not paycheck to paycheck anymore. So now you start thinking about things like buying a house and then maybe some investments as well. Gotten some professionals in the business to come and talk to you guys in 3 different areas. Number 1 is real estate investing. And then we're going to move on to loan servicing. That's going to be Jack Dixon with Marika's team. Lastly, we're going to talk about the process of buying a house, which is going to be Marika herself. And she's going to give us some insight on that. So with that being said, we will hand it over to Q Alexander to do her presentation on real estate investing.
I want to start by saying thank you for letting us join your real estate investment event. So thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Q Alexander Williams, and I own Alexander Williams Investment Management Group. Alexander Williams Investment Management Group actually owns a property management firm, which is Design House. What we do is we specialize in investment real estate. So investment real estate is going to be a little bit different than private real estate. It's going to be a little bit different than private equity real estate, although we encompass all of it. So our services are for fiduciary purposes. That means if it's not making you money, we don't want to do it because we don't make money unless you make money. So I'll start off by saying we're an investment firm that specializes in portfolio management. That means if you have 1 house or whether you have 20, we're going to help you maximize how much that house is going to make on rent. If you need to sell that house, if you need to use that house as equity to be leveraged elsewhere, or any of those general topics. So our services are specifically on rental units. So when we're onboarding a house for an investor, we have a couple of real estate agents, and what they do is they go and look for houses that's going to maximize how much residual income a house is going to get, because it could be kind of twofold, right? So if you have a house and you're looking for a house, the first thing we're going to do is not like we're going to just say, hey, go buy a house. We're going to see if that house is going to make you enough money and in what area. And if it doesn't make financial sense, we're going to say, let's bypass that property. But some of the services that we offer with that is wealth management. So wealth management goes with investment management. So we're going to make sure it makes sense for that individual. And if it doesn't make sense for the individual, we're going to bypass it. So it's not just going to be for the purpose of purchasing a house. The house would have to make sense for your family and for yourself and for what it is that you wanted to do in the future. Houses can do several things. The first thing a house can do is, of course, make you residual money. The second thing it's going to do is, do you want to keep this house? Do you want to sell this house? Or do you want this house for other purposes, say for tax write-offs? Because they could do several different things. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So we're an investment firm that's been, like Ali said, in the area for a little over 20 years in the DFW area, although we have expanded to several states. We encompass pretty much the bottom part of the United States. And we just started doing that maybe in the last 2 to 3 years. Like I was stating before, real estate investment has a couple of different things. There's long-term residual income, which is steady cash flow. There's passive income. We have the ability to leverage funds. So we're also a non-banking financial institution here in Texas. That means we can also lend funds for a property as well. We help with property ownership, and we also do equity building with capital. So that's to say, if you have a house and you're looking to say, well, this house isn't performing like I thought it would, we'd help you in your portfolio say which is the best one to sell in order to grow your portfolio, because sometimes it's better to sell one in order to grow your portfolio. So we offer a couple of different options for people. The number one option that we have is going to be tenant placement. So tenant placement is basically, we're going to locate that tenant for you. We're full compass. That means we're going to locate the tenant for you. We're going to do everything that house needs to do to have it to go to lease. That's any make readies, anything that house needs. Now, with that said, we specialize in HUD, and we specialize in HUD because it's going to be lower risk for an investor. So lower risk means that with HUD, and if you don't know what HUD is, you can always do a Q&A with us and we can schedule some time with you to explain it as well, but it's going to be Section 8. Section 8 is government subsidized for properties. And for an investor, that's going to be a little lower risk because the city pays for some, if not all, of that monthly mortgage or monthly rent to the house. So we find that to be a lower risk, and we typically guide our investors towards those, especially the newer investors. We're going to guide you to those properties because we don't want your house to be at risk. Full property management means we're going to locate the tenant. 90% of the time, they're going to be on a 1-year lease, unless there's a corporate lease, which most investors don't do corporate leases. We'll collect the rent on the property. We'll enforce from both ends. That's going to be housing as well as the tenant. We'll evaluate the house for any maintenance, and we have online portals that the tenants have. The investor has absolutely no contact with that tenant unless they choose to, which would be an odd thing to choose to do if you're paying for a service. But the investor has no contact with the tenant. That means they don't have your name, your number, your email. They don't have any contact with you. So they're going to go through our property management company for any of their needs. And the cost for tenant placement is typically going to be 1 month's rental fee. And you can handle that a couple of different ways. Most investors opt for us to go with their direct deposit so that there's no upfront cost. Our fees do start at 8%, but typically that's going to be a little on the higher end, and that's going to be on the lower end properties. Say if your house is getting $3,000 worth of rent, we're definitely not going to charge 8%. So it's a fluid number that we use. Typically, most of those tenants are going to stay on average about 3 to 4 years. HUD tenants tend to stay a little bit longer for more stability. We normally do a rent increase to our properties without asking, and that's going to be at the 10-month mark. There are pros and cons to every rental transaction when it comes to leasing. Of course, just like if you live in a house is going to have some problems. So any house is going to have some problems. But with HUD, typically those are going to be resolved pretty quickly, and the maintenance is going to be low. So the pros and cons are typically the leases are about 2 to 4 years. You have about 0 to 40% liability from the tenant. Sometimes it's 60, but that's going to be rare. They must give a 30-day notice to vacate. Once they are putting in their 30 notice to vacate, we also see if there's any fees owed, so they don't just leave owing money. We don't do a credit check because they are on the program. We don't check for their credit scores or anything that has to do with finances because their housing authority is normally going to run their finances for them. So we actually make it easier for them to qualify. So we normally have a backlog of tenants waiting for properties, which is also good for an investor because you don't have to wait and have the fear that this house is going to be vacant for long periods of time. A standard tenant on the opposite end, they normally only stay about a year, 18 months. It's hard for them to renew because we're going to do that rent increase to help offset any taxes and insurance. And they have a higher volume of maintenance calls. So we tend to shy away from standard tenants, although we accept both kinds. Now, we have a couple of realtors that we work with. I'm going to hand it over to Kina, which is one of our realtors, and she's one of our top producers for Design House. And she'll help you and tell you a little bit more about how her process works with helping you find a rental property. Kina?
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be invited. So as Q said, my name is Kina Whittemeyer, and I am a preferred realtor with the Design House. And what that means to you is that everything that Cubator just reviewed with you, I've already worked and have a proven track record for that particular strategy. So what that means is I'm looking for properties when have a very streamlined process. It's very simple for you. If you decide that you're looking to invest in a real estate property here in the Texas area, Florida area, and maybe other areas coming soon, all you have to do is very simply reach out to me, let me know that you are an active investor, and then we're going to set up a short call to review, what your investments goals are. So majority of investors, do some hold properties, some flip properties, and there's a lot of different strategies in place. But at the end of the day, what your benefits are you're looking for is really your equity. You're building your capital. Property ownership is a given. And then your ability to leverage your funds, passive income, who wouldn't want that, and residual income, or you can hold those properties for a steady cash flow. And I like to say steady cash flow several times because that's always a goal for us to add extra income into our lifestyle to help us with our lifestyle management, right? So the services I provide, like I said, is really doing your investment property analytics and your property reports. And of course, I offer virtual showings and I pre-walk all properties before we go into contract. But let me just detail something with you, because in the beginning, I just said, hey, my name is Keena, but I want to stop and tell you what what services I provide to you, but understand that what my background is there. So I have my bachelor's in marketing. I've worked over 20 years, don't want to tell my age, over 20 years in corporate America as a pharma sales rep. And so I'm saying that to tell you that my strengths comes from analysis and negotiations with contracts. So if you are looking to invest in real estate and you need a realtor that's going to provide you with assistance with running your analysis, your cash flow, your equity, things of that nature, I will be a good source for that, because that's where my strength is. So I'm not here trying to give you a sales pitch. I just wanted to let you know that my business is aligned with Cuvator's business with the design house. I know their structure of their company and how the investments work. And I just, here to assist you in any way I can. So again, write my name down, take a picture of my card here on this slide. Contact me anytime. It's a very streamlined process because I have a proven track record where I could give you referrals if needed. But if you have any questions for me, feel free to email me, text me, communicate with me your best at, whatever method you best prefer. But I'm definitely here to assist you guys if you're looking to move into real estate investments here in this area. Have a great one.
Thank you, Keena.
No problem.
All right. Sorry, Keena, I have a question for you. Usually, how long does the process take? Like when we contact you and you get a property for us, so whole process till getting and finalizing the property, how long does it take usually?
Okay, so typically the process would take about 30 days. But Simon, the first step would be is very simple. It's just contact me. Let me know that you're an active investor. And what I do is I have a streamlined process where I'll add you to my list and I will send you out properties that meet the criteria that we just reviewed. And then we'll go from there. So it's very streamlined. And then when we have our first call, you'll tell me exactly what you need and how deep of an analysis you need on that particular property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Keena. We also deal with another realtor who is Kay Edwards. I believe Kay is also on the call. Kay Edwards mainly specializes in commercial property and residential as well, but she mainly specializes in commercial properties. Kay, are you on the line? She may not be able to speak right now. But again, we have two realtors that we deal with, and both of those realtors would be able to assist you. And I would like to say that if you locate a house, let's just say you locate your own property, we always push you to say, to come to us first and say, does this property make sense? Because if the property doesn't make sense, we are not going to have you, we're going to suggest that you don't buy the property. There are properties that may make sense to you that would not make sense to us in an investment term. So we're going to stay away from those type of properties, even though it may seem like gold. I will also say this too, when you get a property, no matter what size that property is, HUD, because we specialize in HUD, they have very specific rental amounts. So they're not fluid. They're not going to move too much. If a house is, say, 4,000 square feet and it's in a certain zip code, I'm going to just say in Rowlett, because that's one of the higher paying zip codes. So if we see a house in Rowlett that's a 3 or 4 bedroom and it's 4,000 square feet, there can be a house right next to it that's, say, 1,600 square feet. They will get the exact same rent. Whether that house is brand new, whether that house is 40 years old, it will get the same rent. So we do like to persuade people to buy lower, sometimes older, because older does not mean that it's going to have more problems. It just means that you may get a better investment out of it in the long run because the mortgage would be lower. And that is something that Keena does specialize in. Now, if you want to contact us, again, feel free to reach out. The Colaberry team does have our contact information. If you have any questions right now, go ahead and feel free to ask.
Someone asked about, what is the minimum initial amount needed for this kind of investment,
That would really depend on your lender. That would depend on your credit score. That would depend on a lot of different things. But when it comes to that we would refer you back over to your lender. We'd refer you back over to a broker, or to one of our real estate professionals. That would be either Kina or Kay. So what we do on our end, we don't necessarily deal with that part of it. What we do is we make sure the house is a right fit, that the house is a good fit for you and what it is that you're looking for. So, but when it comes to a monetary amount, it just depends on the person. Some people have $10,000 to put down, some people have 20. So that would also kind of curtail what kind of house you're looking for too, and what's available for you in that purchase area. Some people actually pool their funds together. So you can have an investment property with more than one owner. So you would keep that in mind too, that when it comes to investment, it doesn't have to be one single owner.
Hey, Alexander. My name is Shri. I have a question. Like, you only do commercial and real estate. You don't do land, right?
Land is a little more difficult. I mean, because we're a management company, there's nothing to manage, right? So we normally deal with the people. And land, you're going to run into a different scenario where if you're wanting to purchase the land, you'd have to find a very specific lender, especially in Texas, that's going to lend to a land loan. Those are going to be a little more stringent than something that has physical property on it.
All right,
Yeah,
I'm
I have a
Saima.
question.
I have. All right,
Oh, go ahead.
so I have a question, and it may sound dumb to you, but
No question.
anyway, I want to ask is, like, these days the housing market, the prices, they are, they are very high. So is it a good time to invest, or if not, then how do you lower that risk, that the value at which we bought the house is not that the house was not of worth of that much?
So that would be once the house comes to us, right? So once you say, this is the address, we're going to do a quick analysis. And on that analysis, we're going to shoot it over to that realtor too. We're going to say, Kina, does this house make sense? Is this right for the market? But a lot of things that we're going to do is, for one, I wouldn't rush and buy a house right now. The interest rates are too high. So with the sale price being high and the interest rates being high, it's not necessarily a good time to go run out and buy a house, especially for a first-time investor. If you're a seasoned investor, there's kind of no wrong time. But if you're a new investor, I would say stay away from this current market. I would say wait until the fall. For one, in the fall, you're going to have lower interest rates, should go down by the fall. Not only that, it's not going to be such a push like it is in the summer to purchase. So the sales price should be a little bit more reasonable in the fall. And right now, you're going to see a lot of these houses that had those deferred payments from COVID, they're going to start going to processing, means they're going to go short sale foreclosures and things like that. So those are going to actually be better houses to purchase right now, in my opinion, than trying to purchase a house on market that's competitive. So you want to stay away from that right now. Right now is not necessarily time. That I would say maybe about 3 months.
So your firm also deals with short sales too?
Yes, we do deal with REO property short sales. We also do pickups. Pickups is going to mean that if someone has a house at a certain price point, we'd actually go and purchase that house for someone and then resell it to one of the investors. So we actually go and purchase homes as well.
If I may ask, which is better to invest our personal names, or like establishing a company, even if this is for the first time?
If it's for your first time, I would say definitely in your name, because you're going to have to come up with less money. So, right, that's the goal overall with anything dealing with wealth management, is spend less. So you're going to spend less putting it in your name. Now, right when you do that, even if it's your first property, within 30 days or right after it closes, you can actually switch it over to a company name. But to purchase, you should put it in your name.
Oh, okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you also do like LLC too? Like do you pull people together for investment?
Yes, and I would actually go back to some of the services that we offer. We do help you put those houses in an LLC. Actually, Kina is very good with that too. She's going to run it down to the local tax office for you, depending on if you're in the DFW area. If you're not in the DFW area.
Come as a group, or do you place us in a group if you are interested?
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand the entire question.
So if you do a group thing, right? So if I'm an individual person, but I want to invest in a group, so do you have a group for us, or do we need to bring the group together to
No,
invest
yes,
that?
no. A perfect example would be this week. We had a property that we saw this week, and we kind of know which investors may be able to sustain a certain house. We're going to reach out to those investors and say, hey, we have a house that we see that may fit your criteria. It only needs $10,000 from a person, or it only needs $5,000 from a person, or it may just need a better signer. So when you have those opportunities, we do reach out to people and say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to do such and such. So we have groups that we pull from, but that's not necessarily together. We're just going to go on our list of investors and say, this one matches this investor.
I have a question. Do you operate outside Texas in other states?
Yes, we have properties in other states. We manage 6 states right now.
Okay, because your attendees right now, we live in different states in the country. And most of us, we are sort of, you know, we sort of know the state we live in. Like most of us, we want to invest there, maybe because the states are sort of progressive. You know, do your customers have choices when it comes to where these properties are located?
Yes, of course, of course you have a choice. It's your money, right? So you have control over what is yours. The only thing that we're going to do is suggest. So if we're going to say, hey, this house doesn't make sense, or you can buy one in a different state that's a little bit cheaper. We can do Louisiana, we could do Florida, we could do Texas, we could do Pennsylvania. It just depends on if that house makes sense. Or if we see another opportunity that may be in a different state, we're going to also refer you to that particular state. So it's not necessarily about the state, it's if the property makes sense. If a house doesn't generate at least like minimum $500 to $600, it's probably not a good investment to go with. So where it's located at doesn't matter too much. Sometimes we'll stay away from California a lot. We'll stay away from New York. And it's only because the rental laws in those states are a little bit more difficult to get rid of tenants that are bad. So you don't want to be stuck with a bad tenant or paying a mortgage. So we do shy away from states that have very loose rental laws.
I live in North Carolina as an example. I don't know if you cover that state. Do you cover North Carolina?
We currently only have 3 properties in North Carolina.
Okay, so you cover North Carolina.
We do.
So
where a house located isn't too difficult. It's going to be, does it support HUD? That's going to be the biggest thing. So where it's located, not too problematic. The main thing that you have to make sure of when you have rental properties is the maintenance, right? So you can manage a house just about from anywhere. It's your maintenance, making sure that no one is upcharging you for those management fees and making sure that no one is upcharging you for maintenance. That's going to be the biggest issue when you go into different states, is finding someone that's going to make sure that the house is well taken care of without it costing you an arm and a leg.
So my question is, I've always had interest in real estate investment, but I've always had issues with getting tenants and getting good tenants, right? So averagely, if somebody gets a home, let's say today I talk with you guys and we find a home, I invest in that home. How long do you think it would take for you to get a tenant, to get somebody into that home averagely?
That would depend on where the house is located and what type of tenant you want. So if you're looking for a standard tenant, they take a little bit longer because they have different qualifications. So if we're looking for a standard tenant, they have to make 2.5 times the rent or 3 times the rent, depending on the property. A standard tenant also has to verify that income. And if they can't do those things or have a certain credit score, they take longer to locate. If it's a HUD participant, normally HUD participants, depending on the size of the house and where that house is located, they take anywhere from 2 days to 20 days. The average is normally about 7 to 8 days. So
Okay.
tenant placement actually happens very quickly.
For a first-time investor, how many investment properties can you get, let's say within a year?
That would depend on your lender. So some of our investors have 1 house, some of our investors have 18 houses. and that's in their name. And then they have some in their company name. So it really depends on your lender and what your lender is willing to loan to you. So that's going to deter that. It depends on how aggressive you are. If you're not that aggressive, or it depends on the market. Can you find a house that's viable? So there's a lot of different factors that go into that. That's like a really loaded question, but it really just depends on the person, their lending status, and how aggressive they are. I've had one client, they had no knowledge of investing. They were pretty scared to do it. They started with one house. It went pretty smoothly for them. By the end of the year, they had 6 properties, and in different states. I'll say that as well. They had 6 properties in different states by the end of the year. So it just depends on how aggressive you are.
Do you all also provide lenders, or do we have to go source the lenders also?
It would depend on what state you're in. If you're in Florida or Texas, we have lenders that's available to you. If you're in a different state, then you would have to go with your preferred lender. But most real estate agents have a preferred lender. So normally the lenders aren't too much of a problem.
Thank you very much, Kuvita. Thank you for coming out and sharing your information. If anybody else have any questions, please contact them because we have to continue with the rest of the itinerary. So thank you very much for coming. We truly appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you for having us.
I'll try to be relevant to a lot of the questions that you guys were asking earlier, but real quick, what I do, I'm a residential loan officer. I've been doing this for 25 years. And so I help people get into homes. So for example, there's a realtor on this call that invited me to be a part of this. Her name is Marika Landerville. And I work with realtors in the DFW area when they have a client, whether you're buying a primary residence or whether you're looking to buy an investment property like you guys were just talking about. It's important to know me to call, because what was mentioned before, most realtors do have a lender that they'll recommend. However, not all lenders are the same. And so I want to talk about what I do specifically and what we do specifically that sets us apart, that can really help you guys win, whether you're trying to buy your first home to live in or your 5th home to live in, or you're getting into the investment property game. Okay. So number one is that everyone, before you buy, and some of you on this call are already homeowners and have bought several homes, but everyone gets pre-approved in this market. It doesn't set you apart at all. You have to get a pre-approval, which is a letter that comes from a loan officer to make sure that you qualify generally for the loan. Now, what I do that's different is I joke around and I say, in this market, and I know some of you are not in Texas, but in the Texas market specifically right now, and in most of the southern states, the market, it's not as busy as it was, let's say 3-4 months ago, but it's still extremely busy. And you want to be prepared that you're going to be in multiple offers, meaning you're going to be competing with 2 to 5 other families when you find a house that you've fallen in love with that you want to buy. And so the idea and the name of the game is that we need to do everything possible to make your offer the most attractive. My wife gets really upset with me because I say, we have to make your offer the prettiest girl at the dance, right? And it doesn't matter if you're not a girl, right? I say that to everyone. Okay, so what we do to do that is, number one, everyone gets pre-approved. So let's set you apart out of the gate by getting you pre-underwritten. And that's a very simple process, and it's a step above a standard pre-approval. So let me talk about the 3 letters real quick that you guys have heard about and make sure that you understand the differences, because it'll help some of you tremendously in this market. Okay, so number one, the lowest level loan officer letter that you want to avoid at all costs is a pre-qualification letter. It is the lowest of the food chain, and it does not help you, and it means nothing. I always say it's really not worth the paper it's written on. It's just a verbal approval from a loan officer. An experienced seller's agent does not want to see a pre-qualification letter. At a minimum, they want to see a pre-approval letter, which means we've reviewed, as the loan officer, your income, your credit, your employment history, and your funds to close, your down payment, whether you're buying primary residence or if you're buying investment property. And so a pre-approval is a step above a pre-qualification. What I do is I pre-underwrite you to make you look even better on paper and in person and when I speak with the listing agent to go ahead and take you through the underwriting process before you've made an offer to buy a house, before you've even found a house that you're going to make an offer on. And that positions you to be in writing when they look at all of these offers, if it's one or if it's five, when you're competing with other offers and you've got a pre-underwritten letter from me stating that you're not just pre-approved, you're pre-underwritten. And as a result, we can close you in 14 days in most instances. That 14-day close with the pre-underwrite really gets the attention of most sellers in this market. And so that's the number one thing I wanted to throw out there based on what I've heard everyone speaking of so far. If you're interested in buying a house, so when you're interested in buying a house, the first thing you want to do, and I invite you, I'll put my contact information. It's always best to text me. I am always on the phone unless I stop to do something like this, and that's day or evening. It's okay to call me late at night. It's okay to call me early in the morning. This is all I do. And there's no obligation. It doesn't cost you any money. And I want to talk about that. When you talk to a lender, when you call me, I'm not charging you anything and you're not paying anything out of pocket for an application. There's no application fee. And my suggestion would be if anyone tries to charge you an application fee, run, don't walk, and call me and text me or someone like me. Okay. The other thing that's important is all lenders are not the same as far as interest rates and closing costs. Okay. There are better deals to be had when you find the right person. Typically, compared to any other local lender that you're going to come across, and definitely a national lender, my interest rates and closing costs, my rate will be probably 0.25% lower than most other local Texas DFW lenders. And my closing costs will probably save you anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000. And so those are substantial numbers when we're talking about interest rate over 3 years, 5 years, 15 years, 30 years, et cetera. So that's super important, okay? You want to talk to several lenders and get a comfort level of who is educating you, who is taking the time to invest in you and explain the process so that you're positioned and ready to buy with confidence, understanding the process with your realtor. I work very, very closely with my realtor partners. Marika is one of them on this Zoom meeting as well. We strategize together. I have to get your permission to say, hey, is it okay if I talk about your financial credentials with your agent? Because it really helps us as a team to strategize on how we write the offer, how quick are we going to put the closing, if your agent knows the listing agent, because I'm also going to pick up the phone and call that listing agent once the offer is made. The importance of that is that a lot of times I can connect with that listing agent and explain, hey, I'm working with Sima. They've made an offer on your listing at such and such address. I just wanted to point out that they're pre-underwritten, not just pre-approved. We can close them in 14 days. Feel free to look me up. I may already know that listing agent since I've been in the business and I'm local and born and raised here in Dallas-Fort Worth. It's amazing how many agents I know and have worked with through the years. So all of that helps whenever a seller and a seller's agent's looking at 2 to 5 to 10 offers on a house. If they see your contract, which is a standardized Texas real estate contract template, if they see this one contract, it's like, oh, that's Jason's client, that's Marika's client. I spoke with the lender. It's pre-underwritten, not pre-approved. They can close in 14 days. He shared with me their credit scores, their general credentials, invited us to ask questions. That causes your offer to stand out. And the idea is that it gives that seller comfort. It doesn't guarantee they're going to accept your offer because your offer has to be an attractive offer to that seller, but it should increase your odds, 70, 80% compared to other lenders out there are not pre-underwriting. They can't close in 14 days. They certainly aren't picking up the phone and calling a listing agent. And they certainly aren't investing that time on the front end to make sure you're pre-underwritten, ready to go. No obligation, free of charge. Those are the first things I want to talk about in this market. And I want to welcome some questions too, because I know that there are some based on how crazy our market has been over the past 2 years and even in the past 5 months. So I want to stop there and make sure I'm making sense so far and maybe field a couple of questions. And Jackie, if you have any suggestions as well, or Marika, I'm happy to address.
So as a loan officer, do you have some leeway as to approving people? For example, some people will say you need to be on a job for like 2 years. As a loan officer, can you override some of those requirements and approve somebody for a loan?
Great question. Okay, so great question. So there are different types of loans. So let me start, Sandy, by saying the types of loans that you guys are probably going to be involved in will either be a jumbo loan, which is anything that's over $647,200. That's a jumbo. That would be the largest loans and above. There's FHA loans, which have loan limits depending on the county, okay, in Texas and every state. You know, most FHA limits right now are around $450,000 for FHA. And then there's conventional, and conventional is $647,200 and below, okay? But conventional is different than FHA, okay? Now, your question about the requirements, what you're questioning is underwriting requirements to get approved for a loan. The underwriting guidelines, it's not always cut and dry. So let me give you an example. Typically, you're going to have 2 years employment history, work history in the same line of work or something that's connected. Now, does it have to be 2 years consecutive? Typically, yes, but not always. Like, for example, let's say that you've been in school for 2 years, and in those 2 years, you've been a full-time student studying economics, studying real estate, studying automotive repair, whatever, right? Trade school, et cetera. Well, if you've been in school for a year or 2 years, and then you've been on your job a year in that line of work or related, that would count as the 2-year requirement in that particular field. But I can't override the underwriting guidelines, but typically as an experienced originator, a loan officer, I know what will work and what won't work on the front end, and we're going to run it through underwriting to make sure if you have those questions. The same thing goes for self-employed. The definition of self-employed for a mortgage lender is even if you're 1099, okay, so maybe you don't have a company set up, you just work on your own and someone pays you to do something. If you're 1099, that's self-employed. And in order to use self-employed income by yourself and to qualify, we have to average 2 years minimum tax returns unless you've been self-employed with that business for over 4 years. So there's a lot of there's so many different layers to the onion that go, you know, we're just talking employment here. There's income, there's credit requirements, there's down payment requirements. There's, you know, what's the lowest you can get into a house for? Well, the answer is 0%, and that's VA. There's also down payment assistance programs, but a lot of times there's a catch to those that make those very challenging, to say the least. But you can get in, you know, standard FHA, 3.5% down payment minimum. There's conventional 3% down payment. So there's so many different products and so many different ways to fit a person's, you know, financial credentials into getting approved. Sunny, did I answer your question there? So I can't override the federal guidelines, but there are so many different products that it's important to talk to someone like myself who's going to listen, and let's see if there's not a box to fit you in based on what options are out there. Okay.
You did, thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. You said you pre-underwrite. What about if it's a new build and it's going to take longer than a month or
yeah, so the pre-underwriting, okay, so that's a great question too. Let's say that it's new construction, or let's say that it's a 50-year-old home, but you haven't written that offer just yet, okay? It doesn't matter. You still want to call me and get pre-underwritten, ready to go. And then let's say you found a new construction and you want to buy that home. Well, that home, let's say it's not going to be complete for 8 months. It still benefits you to not just have a pre-approval. A lot of times that construction lender, that construction manager, that salesperson is going to require you to get pre-approved or pre-qualified with the preferred lender of that builder, but they're not going to require you to use that preferred lender those lenders will not pre-underwrite you 9.99 times out of 10. So it's important, regardless if it's new construction or existing construction, go ahead and get pre-underwritten so that you're ready and prepared, because what if you think you're going to buy a new construction, but then you realize there's delays and there's supply chain issues and they're increasing the sales price on you, and now it's 50,000 more. Well, you might come across an existing home that's a better deal for you, maybe in that same development and community, potentially, that bought 6 months ago or 4 months ago. Maybe they got a job transfer, maybe they got a divorce, maybe they had a death in the family, maybe they had a job loss, so many different things. You want to be prepared to move quickly, pre-underwritten, boom, buy that existing home that's new construction. So whether it's new construction or existing home, it's still essential to call and get pre-underwritten, if that makes sense.
Doesn't it expire?
Oh, how long is it good for?
Yes, how long is it good for?
Okay, so it's credit reports generally, okay, as rules of thumb, it's a case by case, but generally speaking, credit reports are good for 90 days. Technically, they can go longer, but lenders were always going to be conservative because, as we all know, credit ratings can change quickly, drastically, if we have one little hiccup. And that credit score is super important when you're getting a loan, whether it's 800s, 700s, or 600s, et cetera, right? So the pre-underwriting is good for 90 days. But I would also say, let's say you lost your job during that time. Well, that pre-underwriting approval is no longer valid if you lost income, right? If anything's changed with your credentials, meaning income, your funds to close required for down payment, et cetera, or your credit scores, that can nullify the pre-approval and the pre-underwrite for obvious reasons, right? It's just making sure that you know you're ready so that you've got that what happens typically, I'll say this, is once you call me, you get pre-underwritten, you start looking at houses, and probably 70% of the time, within a week, you're out looking at houses and you're making an offer to close in 14 days. Because there's a cost of waiting. We've all seen it, right? All of us on this Zoom call right now, think of the house you looked at a month ago that's now 350,000, and you remember 2 years ago when you could have bought it for 180. Right? The cost of waiting based on inflation right now is pretty phenomenal. And the supply and demand in our area in DFW, for those of you in Texas and DFW specifically, there's still so many people moving here daily that just from supply and demand, prices are still going up, regardless of rates popping up a little bit. They popped way up and then came right back down, but they're higher than where they were a year ago for sure. But they're still historically low, and the demand is high, and we're all experiencing inflation with the cost of gas and food and everything. Well, one way to protect your wealth as a home, owning real assets, because if you keep $100,000, let's say, in a bank account, well, in a year, that $100,000 might only buy the equivalent of $85,000 worth of goods, because the value of our dollar is going down. Everything's so much more expensive. But if you bought a $100,000 house, well, that $100,000 house is now worth 120. So owning a home is a great hedge on inflation if you know that you're going to be here, right? You know you've got your job, you know you're renting. There's no reason to waste that money in rent. One other thing I want to segue into based on investment properties. You know, when you buy an investment property, okay, when you go conventional financing, it requires a minimum down payment of 20%, and the interest rates are better at 25% down. That's a pretty hefty requirement for a lot of beginner investors. And one great way to get into the investment property game is through your first home purchase. So you can buy your primary residence for as little as 0 down if you're a veteran and you have VA eligibility, to 3% down, to 3.5% down. Families can give you gift. There's a lower down payment on primary residence, and your interest rate and the terms of those loans are much, much more in your favor as well than an investment. Investment property interest rates are much higher than primary resident interest rates. The down payment on investment properties is much higher than your primary residence. But the idea is once you buy the house as your primary home, you move into the house and live in it as your primary home. There's no requirement. I mean, you could live there 6 months and then decide to rent it out and buy another primary residence. And the renter is offsetting the cost of that mortgage. The key thing is making sure you do it truthfully, ethically, with the right intent that you are going to buy a house as primary residence and you're going to move into it. But as long as that's true, and as long as you do that, there's nothing that prohibits you in the future to then renting that house out as an investment property and then going and buying another primary. It's just a way to utilize buying a home as your primary residence to turn those properties into investment properties. Does that make sense?
When you do this step, like moving to another primary resident, does the rate will be matching as this is like a first time buyer? So it's not going to be the rates of the investment. I'm talking about the mortgage rate.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Let me try to answer it this way. So let's say that you get into, let's say you're buying your primary residence, and let's say you have an interest rate of 5.5%. Okay. So let's just say you're in your primary home. It's 5.5%. Let's say you've lived there 6 months to 12 months, and you decide that you want to make that a rental property. So you find a tenant, and you can use your realtor, you can use Marika, and they'll help you find a tenant to rent that house. And then you want to turn around and you want to buy a new house. Your current loan that you have does not change. It stays in place. Just because you turn it into an investment property, it doesn't require you to change your loan terms, and nothing changes. That's a fixed loan if you did a fixed rate based on your primary residence. And there's nothing that prohibits you from then turning around and buying a primary residence based on the current market. The rates could be lower, the rates could be higher. It just depends on where the market is at that time.
So
The key though is, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
For the second mortgage, you still have to carry about 20% from the first mortgage, right? So even if you rent it out, it's not going to cover the whole mortgage. This is like from underwriter perspective. You still have to be responsible for at least 20% from the first mortgage. Is that right?
No, not at all. You'd be amazed. There are people who have 5-10% equity only in a house, right? That have owned the house 6 months to 12 months and decided they want to rent it out and buy another one because they know it's a good investment opportunity, right? The key thing is, and this is where your real estate agent will help you by saying, hey, your house will rent out for $2,000 a month. Well, if your mortgage payment is $2,000 a month, it's covering that mortgage payment. In my world of qualifying, I can only use 75% of the rental amount, but it's covering the majority of that payment. And let's say it's $2,500 rent, but your monthly mortgage payment, including taxes and insurance, is around $2,000. Well, you're cash flowing $500 a month. So that's actually more income we use to qualify when you buy the next primary. But no, there's no requirement of 20% when it comes to renting it out. 20% comes into play if you were right now saying, I'm going to go buy an investment property. I already live somewhere else, so I'm going to buy an investment property. It's going to require 20% down payment minimum.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not talking about the down payment. What I was referring, like when you go to the second primary residence, you are renting the first one, and let's say it's for $2,000, but now, and your mortgage is $2,000. When you apply for the new one, like the expense, the debt ratio will add another 20 to 25% from your previous mortgage, right? Even if you have like.
Well, let's take that example to make sure that I'm answering. So let's use a rental amount. Let's say that your mortgage payment is $2,000, okay?
Yes.
And let's say that the rental amount is going to be $2,000 that you can get in rent, okay?
Right. Yeah.
So in the mortgage qualifying world, I'm going to use your income from your job and all the other stuff, but I've got to take into account this property that you're going to rent out. So if you take $2,000 rent, I can only use 75%, which is $1,500.
Yes.
Okay. To count towards your debt to income ratio from that house. So in reality, you're negative $500, right? You're making $500 less than you would be otherwise, because the way I qualify and am required to qualify that rental at 75%, you're not getting credit for the full 2,000. And that's to account for vacancy. That's to account for.
Yeah. So
really
that will negatively hurting me, right?
It can.
Okay.
It can. That all depends on your, like, let's just assume that you have a primary job full time and then you have your first rental. It all depends on where your debt to income ratio is in the first place. If you're borderline of able to qualify or not, that $500, excuse me, can definitely make a difference negatively. But if you're not close on debt to income ratio, it may not matter. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the idea, the general idea, it will be counting towards your debt ratio.
It is
25%.
Yeah, that 500, yeah, would be 25% of that $2,000. That's correct. But let me throw, this is where layers of the onion get really interesting. What if you have a car payment that's around $500, but you only have $3,000 left on that? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, the $500 will still count.
Well, or I would say, hey, if you can afford it, you might consider, let's go ahead and pay that car off. That eliminates that $500, which will counteract that 500 negative from the rent, which means you're back to even. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I only have one more question, if you don't mind. From a loan officer perspective, I know you don't have any control on the underwriter. Like, they come up with their own policies and stuff, but sometimes, like, when I have an agreement with the loan officer, because there's no connection between me and the underwriter. So not most of the time, but sometimes, at the very last moment, something will jump out of nowhere that the underwriter, they will require you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've probably been settling your situation for the last 2 months. And for example, this has happened to one of my friends. He don't have any more money to spend or to pay off, like, let's say, one of the credit cards. He already had the down payment, but then the underwriter informed the loan officer that, hey, I'm not going to approve this unless he pay out that $2,000 or $1,500, toward that credit or whatever the case. So from your perspective as a loan officer, do you already have all the requirements from the underwriter so we don't see anything jump from nowhere?
Yes. Yeah, that what you're describing is exactly why the pre-underwrite is so important versus just a standard pre-approval or pre-qualification, because what you're describing is exactly what happens and why it's stronger and worth everyone's while to be pre-underwritten, not just pre-approved or pre-qualified, because you don't want those surprises. So why not go ahead and have everything reviewed and approved as if you're under contract, but when there's no property address, right? And you have a lender that's willing to invest that time, because that should minimize and frankly eliminate that situation from occurring, right? That's the whole point of it, is to make sure you identify any red flags or problems or challenges that could get in the way of getting approved up front. That's what positions you to be able to close in 14 days versus 30 days or 45 days. Most of the time when my clients are competing with other offers on the table, they have an advantage with me because I've done this for 25 years. I joke around. That doesn't mean I know everything. In fact, in 25 years, what it means is I've made a lot of mistakes in 25 years. And I'm a firm believer that what makes someone really powerful in what they do and in life is experience. But it's not experiencing just success. It's the failures that make you strong. And let me tell you, I've done over 11,000 loans, and there's been a lot of human error in 11,000 loans that makes me a lot better than most LOs, not because I'm great, but because of the experience of mistakes I've made in 25 years, if that makes sense, right? For all of us, I hope in life, I hope I'm not the only one. Right?
Let me tell you, all of us here in this community, we are programmers, so we learn from the failure, from the mistakes. There's no just like one track. So thank you so much. That was a great info.
I have a quick question. So you mentioned new home and builders loans and all that. Can you throw more light on maybe some advantages or so of the builders loan versus getting loans outside, like from commercial banks or something?
Yeah. Okay. So, but let's talk specifically. I think I understand the question. It's good. So here's what's interesting, right? What I do compared to, let's say if you have a pre-underwritten letter for me versus a pre-approval letter from Chase Bank or from Prosperity Bank or Bank of America, right? Is that what you're asking me?
I'm just like trying to compare, okay, do I get the loan from the builder or from, let's say, a commercial bank? Like, which one will favor me better?
Well, so a commercial bank, experienced real estate agents on the selling side, okay? As you know, because we all have checking accounts and savings accounts at whatever bank that we bank at, okay? Banks are only open Monday through Friday from about 9 to about 4 at the latest, other than the drive-through. And then on weekends, they're closed. Well, that also applies to those standard commercial retail banks and their mortgage loan officers that are sitting there that help mostly those clients because they don't know me. They don't have a relationship with a real estate agent or a lender like myself. And so the problem with the big banks is that, number one, their rates and fees are typically much, much higher. Number two, they won't pre-underwrite you. They'll just pre-approve you, which means you haven't been through underwriting, going to the other gentleman's concern that we were just talking about. And the most important thing is that when you need a lender, the real estate business is done Monday through Friday after 4 p.m. to midnight, and Saturday and Sunday from 8 a.m. to midnight. And I've been on the phone after midnight thousands of times in my career. So big banks, and we use big banks. There are investors, right? We sell in the secondary market to Fannie, Freddie, and these large banks. They're not bad entities. We all need them and we use them. However, in the mortgage side of things, experienced agents, if that seller gets a pre-underwritten letter from me as a local lender, not a large Chase retail commercial bank, and then they have the Chase pre-approval letter, if they're experienced, they're going to choose my offer which is your offer, over that large bank every single time, because they're notorious for not closing on time. They don't have any relational accountability to any party to the transaction. Marika sends all of her buyers to me and has for several years now. Well, she's trusting her reputation, she's trusting her income and future referrals in my hands to get that loan done and close on time, and her reputation with that listing agent, because all these agents are out there, they work together daily with buyers and sellers on both sides of the fence, right? And so the accountability that I have is 1,000-fold compared to a loan officer in a commercial bank that only works from 9 to 5 at best, and they're not available on weekends. If you're dealing with an experienced agent, your offer won't get accepted because they have a reputation, unfortunately, just because of how they're set up, of not closing on time and not being able to get in touch with a human being without calling an 800 number or emailing and having to wait a day or two, right? The other thing is, most important to you guys, is that you pay a premium for going to those large banks. And those large banks are our investors. They buy our loans from us in the secondary market, but you're getting a much better deal by going through me. It's the difference between you buying the same shirt at Costco versus Neiman Marcus. It's the same shirt. You just didn't pay $200 for it. We paid $30 for it, right?
Jason, this is Q Vader. I would like to interject on that a little bit. Most of the time what happens, just like you said, once that loan closes, that big bank, Tony, is going to come and swoop up that loan in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, like 7 days. We want to get 5 to 7 days. That's right.
Yeah, the big bank that you're talking about is going to be the same person that's going to be your service provider.
They will serve, meaning that's who you'll make your mortgage payments to as the servicer, would be the big bank. But if you originate your loan through the big bank, you're at a disadvantage in multiple offers because of what we were talking about before. And the big bank they charge you retail prices versus you're going to get wholesale prices through me, because most of that mortgage business out there is bought through the MEs out there, not through the retail chain. And if you notice, if you'll just Google the headlines, mortgage layoffs 2022, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank, you'll see they're hurting on the retail side. That it's the most profit they make is by buying those loans from us out there, which there's many of us out there. And that's a benefit to you guys as the consumer because you're getting a lower, you should be getting a lower interest rate and lower costs than retail large box banks. Does that make sense?
That's absolutely right. My second home, when I purchased it, I had two applications, one from Freedom Mortgage and Mr. Cooper, and the other one with Chase Bank, which is my banking. So the Freedom Mortgage, they give me 2.75, and Chase, they gave me 4. So it's the same time, the same application, the same income, everything is the same. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's right.
So that's why it's important to shop. And a lender should be open to explaining what I'm wanting. This is an example of the conversations I would have individually. And typically, I mean, they're long conversations because we need to have just a Q&A session. You know, I'm going to dive in. I always say, hey, look, where are you at in the process? And because there's buying homes, but there's also refinancing. Refinancing, since rates have popped up, that's not relevant for most people right now, unless you go through a divorce or something, or when you need to cash out equity to pay off debt. But when it comes to purchasing a home and investment properties, et cetera, the first thing I'm going to do is say, hey, look, tell me where you're at in the process. And then I'm going to interrupt you and I'm going to ask you a bunch of inappropriate financial questions for a stranger to ask you so we can dive into conversationally what to expect so that I can set appropriate expectations of the process and position you to win.
Quick question, Justin.
I have a question. Like, would you compare yourself to a hard money lender, or how are you different from a hard money lender from when you do your loans?
Yeah, great question. Hard money lenders make up their own guidelines. Their interest rates, they're almost like, and there's a place for them. Okay, so I don't mean this in a negative way, but let me just say the pros and cons. Okay, the positive to a hard money lender is that you can get a loan fast and furious, and you can flip the house quickly. And a lot of home flippers use hard money lenders to do that. The downside is that you have to have really good credit, typically minimum of 700, and you also are going to have a minimum of 20 at the lowest, usually 25% down payment, just to get that hard money loan. And here's the biggest kicker: if you're at a 12% interest rate, that's like the bottom of the barrel. We're talking 12, 15, 18, 20% rates. That's the downside of a hard money lender. I'm a conventional VA, FHA jumbo lender. Our guidelines are set by the federal government. The federal government owns Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development. That's FHA, that's the federal government. They're all separate entities, but they're all over the umbrella of the federal government. Same with VA, but it's under the VA. Same with USDA. Jumbo lenders, that's a little bit different. Those are not federal loans, but they go off the same underwriting guidelines, generally speaking. Did I answer that question?
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, hard money lending, it's almost like legal. What's the, I joke around, right? Those old movies, we look at those New York movies with the mob, right? Where you get the loan to do, they're kind of like I call them the real estate mob loans, so that you can get a house and buy it and fix it up and sell it and pay that loan off quickly, because the interest they're charging you is a killer. I mean, it's super high. Whenever I tell you 12% to 20%, if your credit's good, your interest rate should be in the 5%, low 5s to high 5s.
Jason, this is Q Vader. I'll interject again. We are a hard money lender. You don't want to deal with us unless it is a short term, if that helps any.
Yeah, tell rate options to the guy who was asking that question. What are give some ideas of what's the minimum down payment, and
it
what are the?
It truly depends on the property, because it's a risk. So because your property is a risk to us, we're going to want to back out of it as quickly as possible as well, to make sure, one, it's a good loan. So we don't want to hold your property. We want our money too when we want it quick, just like he was saying. And it is like the Wild West. It has no standard or guidelines. Like, we're registered with Texas as a non-banking financial institution. The two things together don't even make sense. So the interest rate is going to vary depending on the person, the purchase, the property. How good is this property that we think we can get it sold again with you? Because now we're your partner. We kind of own this house with you. And until you can get rid of it. So you don't want a hard money loan. That's going to be like your last option. Your best option would be Jason. So you don't want a hard money loan.
Well, but let me play on what she said and say there's a time and a place for hard money loans, but that hard money lender, I mean, she's going to tell you, okay, we'll lend on this because they look at the value of the home. They look at your financial credentials, and it's a win. It's a win for that hard money lender. They're making a killer return on interest. It should be a win for you as well. But and that hard money lender doesn't want to lend you money that they lose on. So it should be a win for you if they believe that you're going to be able to sell that house and make a profit, and that hard money lender gets paid off with their interest. I mean, it should be a win for the buyer. Right? That's something that I hear a lot these days that drives me crazy. Good business, when it's done with the right people, the right way, it should be a win in all directions. The buyer, the seller, the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, the lender, the title company. I mean, everyone should win when it's done right. There should not be a loser. So I think that's super important because I don't know what everyone has been taught. Because I've heard it on both sides of the spectrum. When it's done well, even hard money loans that are super high interest rates, there's a place and a time for that. That's a win for everyone. But I agree, that's a last resort. You need to be experienced to know what you're doing there.
And those are typically going to be flips. Those are not going to be rental investment opportunities. Those are going to be flips.
I wanted to move down to New Braunfels. I live in Dallas, so I don't want to move right now, but if I wait maybe 3, 4, 5 years to buy a house, might not be on that price range. So they told me about this opportunity. I just signed a contract, and then they told me that the interest will be higher if I go as an investor, and they will not sell the property. So in the contract says that I am gonna live there, and you touched that that topic before. How long do you have to live there? Because it doesn't say a year, but my realtor told me that it is maybe a year. It has to be a year, or how long?
Okay, this is a very good question, and this is super important. When you close on a conventional loan, okay, when you close on an FHA loan, when you close on a VA loan, when you're buying a property as primary residence, okay, and the reason you do that, the reason people want to do this, and primary residents are lower interest rates, lower down payment, which means easier to buy, easier to get into. Now, when you buy homes, you sign these federal documents stating you're not making any false or misleading statements. Mm-hmm. And here, the big warning is you do not want to follow the advice of any loan officer or banker that encourages you to buy a home as your primary that they know you're not going to move into, because that loan officer, that their name is nowhere on your documents. Okay, they're not signing their name to the attestation, I think is the legal term that you're making, that's your primary residence. Mm-hmm. And the most common mortgage fraud that happens, and a lot of times it's the consumer that has been led down the wrong road. They're committing mortgage fraud by saying, this is my primary residence, but they know they're not going to move into that house. If that file were audited and they check to see if you're living there, if that was rented out, literally you can be fined. It's $10,000 and up to 99 years in prison. I can't imagine you get that kind of crazy sentence. But at the end of the day, it's a huge criminal act, and it's the most common fraud that's committed in our industry, because the people will own a house. I'm like, hey, I'm going to buy this house as my primary, but really they're buying it as an investment property, and they have zero intention and they never move into it. That's mortgage fraud. They can get fined. They can go to jail. It's terrible. You just don't want to have any part of that. Your question, what's the timeline? there actually, Eduardo, is no timeline definitively in the guidelines, but the key legal term is intent. What is your intent? Are you buying this house to go in and move within, here's the definition, within 60 days, are you going to move into that house? Is that your intention? And if it is, and that's true, and you're moving into it, there's nothing, what if you moved into that house in New Braunfels and then 45 days in, you get fired from the job? So you got to go back to Dallas. Well, you're not in trouble. That your intent was, that was your primary residence. You moved into it. So let's say that your intent is to move into it, but you're going to turn it into an investment property as quickly as possible. How do you do that legally? Well, it's all about intent. I would say the safest bet is that you buy the property, you move into it, and you stay there a minimum of 6 months. But I feel comfortable at 6 months. But that's how I would advise my clients. But I'm always going to highlight, don't commit mortgage fraud, and don't even listen to someone that'll find some way to justify that, because it's wrong. It can hurt you for a long time financially, occupationally. Don't do it. Don't play that game, because a lot of people have, and it's not worth the risk.
Well, thank you for answering the question. So if I move there and live there for a while, say a year, it's going to be fine, and then you can buy another one if you have the money.
Rent that one out and buy another one, and buy that new one as your primary. But now the same guideline. Are you really going to move out of this? Yeah. And that's the smart way to do it, because you get a better interest rate and you got into those properties with a lower down payment, which saves money for you to keep being able to do that, right? As long as you do it with the right intention and you follow the compliant guidelines and not break the law.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you very much.
But what if you already have a house that you're living in and you want to buy a residential house and rent it out?
Yeah, so that would be that would be buying investment property, because you're not going to move into it. Here's another, okay, so this is a great question. Onyeka, am I saying that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so Onyeka, here's the second most common fraud that occurs, okay? There's also what's called second home, okay? Second homes are not investment properties, but you can rent out second homes, and second homes require 10% down, not 20 to 25%. And the rate's a little bit better than investment property. Is that making sense so far? Second homes. So the question that you asked me, if you have your primary and you're buying a house to rent it out, that's investment property, and that's legitimate, and that would require a minimum of 20% down, and for better terms, 25% down. But here's the great news: we can offset if we can offset the rent based on what the market rent analysis it's on. It's another question. I don't want to go that deep just yet. But basically, that would be investment property. You'd have to put 20 to 25% down payment, and it'd be a higher interest rate. Okay. You don't want to try to buy, make it something that it's not, because that would be committing fraud, whether you knew it or not, because you're going to sign your name saying that I am attesting that this is true and I'm not making any false or misleading statements. Okay.
So there's nothing like a second home.
No. So a second home has to be, there's certain definitions of a second home. A second home is something truly, like, for example, let's say we're in Dallas. Let's say that we want to buy a house in Colorado, okay? Or we want to buy a lake house on Cedar Creek, or we want to buy a house in the hill country out towards Hillsboro or Meridian, or whatever the case may be. Or let's say we want to buy a second home because we want to go to Baylor games and see Chip and Joanna in Waco. I don't know, right? Whatever people do. That would work because there's a distance, and that it is a destination, and you are actually going to go there and enjoy it as a second home. You can also rent it out, but you really want to make sure that you're using it a certain number of days in the year. Typically it's around 3 months, 180 plus days. I think it's the last time I looked it up. You can rent out a second home, but you don't want to commit fraud by buying a second home, but you're not really going to use it as a second home. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
There's a comment on the chat, which is very, very interesting for me. Does the HOA communities allow HUD tenants, or it depends?
Well, so HOA bylaws dictate any given area, right? Whenever you have an HOA, you have to go by their bylaws, and they've got some power and authority, right, to stick it to you if you don't follow the rules financially. Okay. I mean, they have the ability to really hurt you. So it depends on the community, but that's something you want to look at when you're buying, let's say, investment property to do short-term rentals, Airbnb or VRBO, which is home away. Okay. It could be a legal thing to do, but if you buy in a community that has an HOA that doesn't allow STRs, short-term rentals, you're dead in the water. You can't do it. But the way around that is usually an HOA is not going to prohibit you from renting a home long-term. Long-term is defined by 30 days or more. Okay. And so, if it's a house in an area like a lake community, vacation there, it's common to be able to rent a house for 30 days, and you can let them, there's ways to get around that, but you definitely want to check the HOA bylaws to make sure that you don't spend all this money getting into a house that they don't let you rent it out short term.
Well, housing program and Section 8 program, this is a long-term, right?
Yeah, that's long-term, because anything over 30 days is long-term. Section 8 housing is long-term. Short-term rentals is the VRBO, where it's like a hotel, but it's a house, right?
Yeah, but I believe that in my neighborhood, the HOA, it doesn't allow Section 8 or housing.
Yeah,
to be rented out.
there can be, and there's zoning restrictions and zoning areas that allow and disallow it too, just based on municipalities' guidelines, right, with certain areas.
Yeah, thank you.
All
I need to
right.
look at
I have a final question. Do you work with people out of Dallas? Because most of us are not in Dallas. If so, if not, do you have recommendations of people who do the same thing you do in other areas?
Yes, I do. I can help you in Texas, anywhere in Texas, and shortcoming, Colorado, Tennessee. If you're in a state that I'm not licensed in, I would help you find a lender that I would feel comfortable referring you out to. It's, I don't find a lot of people that have the rates that, I want you to get the best rate and the lowest cost with the best service. So I'm really careful about referring, but the short answer is yes, I would help you. And I can still walk you through to kind of share with you and educate you what you need to be asking. And you can, use me as a source of information through my contact information here. And at some point, I bet we'll be able to do business, but I'm happy to help and build that relationship.
The builders have their preferred lenders, right?
Yeah, okay, let's talk about that. Builders, a lot of times, they say, okay, we want you to use our lender, and if you do, we'll give you $5,000 off your closing costs if you use our lender, right? And the reason they're doing that is because they want to control the transaction, which is counterintuitive to good negotiating, right? Because the seller of a new home is the builder, and the lender that works for that builder is looking out for that builder, not you. Just like you want to make sure you have a real estate agent when you buy a new home, don't use the sales agent at the builder's office, because if you do that, you've now entered into a sales contract that's written by the builder's attorney to protect the builder primarily as priority. You're using the builder's salesperson that gets paid off of the transaction by the builder, which is their employer, and you're using the lender that the builder has a relationship with that's protecting that builder, and they're going to protect that relationship because they want that business. And you're probably using the builder's title company on top of that. So a lot of times you're going to have to get pre-approved through the builder's lender regardless, just based on their process. But I would still say, call me and let's see if I can match or beat what that builder's offering, because my rates and fees are so much lower. And the way that those builders lenders are paid and compensated it's different than me, and I have a lot more room to try to navigate to get you to where we can keep the transaction with your real estate agent and with us, so that the seller is not controlling your transaction, right? But let's pretend if that builder's preferred lender is offering you a better financial deal, as much as it pains me and I don't want that situation, I'm going to tell you, you know what, I can't match or beat it. You need to go ahead and stick with the builder's lender, and I'm available to help you through the process. But 7 times out of 10, I can offer you a better deal. The best way for all of you guys, I didn't even put my email address, because always text me. Just let me know who you are and how you know me. And that would be very helpful.
I just wanted to let you know that my story is that I bought a house in 2017. I'm still living in the house. Got it. I went for the home equity line of credit, got approved.
Yes.
And I want to buy an investment property. I was wondering if I can speak to you on one-on-one basis and see what are the routes that we can get it to purchase the house.
We can look at that. Zishan's bringing up a good point. You had the ability, if you can afford it. And by the way, when I talk with you individually, I say this, I'm like, we're going to talk. I'm going to talk to you like you're my friend for 20 years, and that we like each other. We're smart and we respect each other, and we know what we're talking about. Because I don't want to say I'm like family, because we don't always like our family or trust them, or they may not know what we're talking about. But I will what I always do is I will tell you what I would tell my loved ones and my closest friends if I thought you were overextending yourself. At the end of the day, I'm going to make my suggestions and professionally, and then, but I will submit. And if you want to move forward and I can make it happen, I will. But if I don't feel good about it, if I feel like you're overextending or it's dangerous or risky, I'll tell you, but I'll submit to ultimately what you want to do, right? But I'm going to talk to you like you're my friend. And if you're my friend, I'm going to protect you, and I'm going to tell you what you might not want to hear, because I care about you and I don't want to hurt anybody, right? So just know, it's like Zishan, one of the thoughts, I don't know the terms, but typically a home equity line of credit is not the right vehicle to use to buy investment property, but you might be able to get a home equity loan, but we'll talk about the specifics and I'll tell you why. But those are scenarios where we can soundboard together, and in a multitude of counsel, there's safety. So that's the approach we'll take together. Okay.
I didn't want to go to the home equity and the refinancing thing, because I did refinance my house to a very low rate for 2.87%. So there was no point of.
If that sounds good, Zishan. So if it's not, that's probably just a home equity loan. A home equity line of credit, typically the interest rate can adjust up and down. Right now, mostly up. Right. So yeah, I just would hate for someone to use, $100,000 to $300,000 of a line of credit that's on an adjustable rate to buy a house, right? We might want to use it to maybe get you in the house, but we'll talk about that. There's other things. We want to make sure you're on a fixed rate, if at all possible. There's a time and a place for adjustable rate mortgages, just like hard money lending, which are also a lot of times are adjustable rates, right? There's a time and a place for it, but it just depends. So we can talk about that one-on-one.
Sure.
Great.
Thank you very much, Jason. Everybody, his contact is in the chat. Up next, we have Marika.
Hey guys. So I'm your local real estate agent. I've been working with Jason for quite some time. He is my go-to guy. He's helped pull out 90% of my transactions. Even with him, I've had people go through their EECU or a local bank, and we've gotten almost to the finish line and something happens, not because of my client, not because of the seller or anything I've done, but because that loan officer either doesn't answer or they're not there for us. But being able to have your realtor and your loan officer, you have a team behind you. When it comes down to underwriting, the underwriters are kind of the person behind the curtain. Me as a realtor, I never deal with them. Jason is the one that deals with them. Your loan officer is the one that deals with them. And they kind of stay hidden from us. We don't know who they are. We probably don't want to know because, bumps in the road happen. But with Jason and having a partnership with your realtor and your loan officer, you have somebody there that can speak for you, not just to put a contract together and do things, but like Jason was saying, with every one of my clients with VA, FHA, which as we all know, are probably the harder contracts to get accepted right now because everybody kind of looks down on them because there's so many other stipulations for VA and FHA loans versus conventional and cash. Cash is always going to be king, but even with cash offers, there's still a lot of issues that could come up. I mean, that's a lot of money that somebody's putting up for a house, and maybe they skip the inspection and now they're getting cold feet. And, there's all kinds of things that can happen. And every contract, every house, every loan, every agent, everything in real estate is never going to be the same. You're never going to deal with the same thing twice. There's always something. So knowing that you've got a great realtor that knows the area, that knows, vendors to help you out, and having that loan officer that they can call at 2 o'clock in the morning while they're on vacation in Colorado with their family. I'm sorry, Jason. But they're going to answer, and you're going to get your answers sooner than later and having to wait that 9 to 5 kind of hours. So when you're ready to start looking for a home, whether it's your investment or your short-term home, kind of your first time, let's get out of the rent race, if you will, or if it's a home that you're looking to stay in for long term, you want to have a great team on your side. And starting with your loan officer, from there you go to your realtor, and they're going to work together. And we're going to sit down with you and kind of go over your criteria. What are you looking for in a home? Here's what you've been pre-approved for. We're going to set you up on a search. And then Jason and I, or your agent and their loan officer, once it comes down to a time where you're ready to put that offer in, we're going to talk amongst ourselves too. Like, hey, Jason, they really want this house. Where are they at in their loan? I know you've got them underwritten. What else can we do? Along with, your agent and their knowledge as well. Then you get that offer put in, and you've got so many things kind of behind the scenes that you don't see with the negotiations, which you're also a part of. But negotiating like different things from your inspection, from your appraisal, and just so many, I guess, files, if you will, that you have to do. It's great to have these people for you. I'm sorry, and Jason, it's so hard to follow up after you. Like, you have so much great knowledge, and the other.
So, I think you're talking about inspections, right? I mean,
yes, the inspections.
Well, I was going to say, Marika, like what I always tell clients is that, when you have an agent that cares and knows the process, once I say you're good to go, right? I call Marika and I say, Marika, Zishan's ready to go. He's looking, he needs to stay within $350,000 and below. Well, then Marika takes it, puts him on the portal, drives him all over the Metroplex. You get to know each other, and Marika does a great job at, building that relationship, so that, and then we're communicating all along. You find a house, well, we've got to look at the property taxes. It always goes back to the numbers for your lender, so that, Marika is ready to go that's what's so great about being pre-underwritten. Whenever you've got a great realtor, the work's been done. The work you have to do with your agent is just enjoy riding around with them and looking at houses and finding the right one and making the offer, and then letting her and myself fight to win that seller's agent's affection to accept your offer. Now I'll be quiet. You go.
No, you're great. With your loan officer and with your agent, it's your appraisal. Appraisals usually can also make or break your home. right now I hear a lot of people saying, marry the house and date the rate. The rate changes or the rate interest rates are going to go up and down. We never know. We don't have a crystal ball. COVID was something special that, nobody knew was going to turn everything upside down. But with interest rates going up, I mean, I know here recently it was almost at 7.52%. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, and it went down.
Yeah, well, so yeah, rates, I mean, it depends on your credit score, right? But let's just say A+ credit. And we also have to say conventional versus FHA, because FHA rates are lower than conventional rates. However, FHA, the mortgage insurance never goes away. FHA, you have to pay I call it an FHA fee. That's 3.6% of your loan amount. And it's rolled into your loan amount, so you don't feel it. But I mean, a $300,000 loan, you're getting it just before anything, any down payment, any closing costs. FHA is going to be an additional $10,000+ compared to conventional. But the FHA rate is lower than conventional. But whenever you look at everything, you'll see that conventional is more cost advantageous. So rates, yeah, they popped up about 5 weeks ago, but they've come down to where they were before they popped up. But they're still really in the fives. If you've got good credit, you're in the fives. Low fives, high fours, depending on FHA conventional. And then there's depending on if you're a 30-year fixed or 15-year fixed. So sorry, Marika, go ahead. Yeah, well, I'm looking at the comments here over, like someone has, like an upper 4% rate. And so one of the questions I'm asking is that FHA or conventional? And then are there points? Because you can buy, there's too much to go over with this many people. But what I would say is you should talk to 1 to 3 lenders. Sometimes I think 3 is too many, but if you don't find a good one, you'll know when you've got one that's educating you versus selling you. You'll know when you've got an experienced one versus someone who's new. And the main thing that I want you to walk away here that can save you a lot of money and help you win. And I think it was Onyeka, or maybe it was Eduardo, there's a true cost to waiting. If you can afford to buy a house now versus renting, don't waste that money in rent. Just start making a mortgage payment. It feels the same, but you get to sell the house at some point in the future and get all that money back and profit. That's typically tax-free if you've been in the house at least 2 years. And that can really build substantial wealth for all of us. I can say personally, the best thing I've ever done for me and my family and our future, God willing it continue, it's been buying and selling houses. And I've watched my clients buy. They called while I've been on the Zoom call. They're a family that lives in Dallas, that she's the mother's in the medical community, the father's in the software development community. They'd never owned a house other than to live in. Well, 2 years ago, they called me and started asking me about investment property. Well, fast forward to today, between the two of them, they own 16 properties and I financed all of them, and they've become great friends and they're sweet. They can do it. You can do it. You just have to have, good enough credit, good enough income, and the down payment to do it. And we just, that takes strategy and a lot of conversations, but you just take it one at a time and don't try to bite off too much all at once. And hopefully this gives you guys a path to it. I know you guys have talked about a lot of different things today, so I don't want to talk too much about this, but I'm happy to.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any more questions for Ms. Privetta or Jason? The floor is open.
I have put up a question on the chat.
I think what you mean is, can you transition an investment property to a primary residence? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Yes, you can. You can. And if you bought that investment property at a higher rate, once you move into it as your primary, if rates are lower, you can refinance to a lower rate because it's now your primary residence versus investment property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yannick asked me, is it possible to switch from FHA to conventional after living in the house for 2 years? Yes. There's no timeline. Okay, so conventional loans, FHA loans, VA loans, there is absolutely no prepayment penalty, meaning you can refinance at any time and pay that loan off at any time. And there is no financial penalty to you as the homeowner and the borrower, okay? So the answer is yes, you can switch from FHA to conventional. And actually it's great because if with the values going as high as they've gone recently, a lot of times you can get out of that FHA. And in fact, if you've been in that FHA for less than 2 years, you'll get part of that FHA funding fee. It's called upfront MIP, PMI, MIP. It's all the same thing, primary mortgage insurance premium, mortgage insurance premium, mortgage insurance. On FHA, that HUD fee that I was telling you about, if you refinance out of it in under 2 years, you get a portion of that cost back, which is a really good thing for you. And then a lot of times you're able to get rid of that mortgage insurance, Yannick.
All right, if not, I just want to thank Quiveda. I want to thank you, Jason. I want to thank you, America, for being a wonderful speakers, and thank you for all the knowledge that you've given unto us. So for everybody else, if you need the information, you can always get hold of me. My email is Jackie@Colaberry.com. So do not hesitate to ask me for the information and I'll be able to help you out. Again, thank you everybody for coming in. Truly appreciate it. And have a wonderful day. And hopefully we can do this again. Thank you, thank you, thank you.